The screams echoed across the crystalline plateau as Captain Vex Corin watched the Velthari priesthood drag the human woman toward the feeding pit. Her defiance cut through the thin atmosphere like a blade, no pleading, no begging, just raw fury that made even the towering aliens step back. "The Devourer demands tribute," High Priest Malachor intoned, his forearms gesturing toward the writhing mass of tentacles and teeth that dwelt in the pit's depths. "Your species has failed to meet the harvest quota. She pays the price." Vex had seen 1,000 executions across a dozen worlds, but something about this one made his blood freeze. The woman doctor, Elena Vasquez, according to her file, had been the lead terraforming engineer on the human colony of Kepler 440b. Her crime? Refusing to poison the water supply of her own people to meet the Velthari's impossible demands. The creature below writhed hungrily, its bioluminescent patterns pulsing with anticipation. Legend claimed it was unkillable, that it had devoured the champions of 7 species over 3 millennia. The Velthari had bound it here, using it as both executioner and symbol of their absolute power. "Your people will learn," Malachor continued, securing the neural shackles around Elena's wrists. "Defiance brings only death." Elena spat blood and fixed her gaze on the alien priest. "My people will learn, all right. We'll learn what happens. When you corner a human, shackles activated, sending waves of agony through her nervous system." She collapsed, but somehow found the strength to laugh up. Sound that made the assembled Velthari shift uncomfortably. Vex had served the hegemony for 15 years, carrying out their orders without question. He'd watched worlds burn and species fall, telling himself it was the natural order. But something in Elena's laugh broke through 20 years of conditioning. "Stop," he said, stepping forward. The crowd turned toward him, confusion rippling through their ranks. Captain Vex Corin, the hegemony's most decorated enforcer, was interfering with a sanctioned execution. Captain Malachor's voice carried, "A warning? You overstep your authority." "My authority comes from the Hegemony Council," Vex replied, his hand moving to his sidearm. "And the Council values useful assets. This human possesses knowledge of advanced terraforming techniques. Her death serves no strategic purpose. The ritual has begun," Malachor hissed. "The Devourer must feed." Below the creature's feeding, appendages emerged from the pit, reaching toward Elena with predatory patience. She met their approach with steel in her eyes, refusing to give her captors the satisfaction of seeing her break. "Then let it feed on something else," Vex said, drawing his weapon. The plasma bolt caught Malachor's center mass, dropping the priest instantly. Chaos erupted as the other Velthari reached for their weapons, but Vex was already moving. His military-grade combat suit amplified his speed and strength, turning him into a blur of deadly precision. He reached Elena just as the creature's tentacles wrapped around her legs. Without hesitation, he activated his suit's energy blade and severed the appendages in a spray of alien ichor. The Devourer's roar of pain and fury shook the very foundations of the plateau. "Can you walk?" he asked, cutting through her shackles. "I can run," Elena gasped, struggling to her feet. "Good. We're going to need 2. As they fled toward his ship, Elena looked back at the man who had just thrown away everything to save her. Why? Vex didn't answer immediately. How could he explain? That her defiance had reminded him of what he'd lost? That her courage had awakened something he'd thought dead? Because he said finally, "Someone needs to show the galaxy that monsters can be tamed." Behind them, the Devourer's howls echoed. Across the plateau, promising vengeance. But for the first time in years, Vex Corin felt truly alive. The Shadowhawk screamed through the upper atmosphere with half the Velthari fleet on its tail. Vex's fingers danced across the control matrix while Elena worked frantically at the navigation console, her engineering background proving invaluable as she rerouted power to the shields. "Jump drives charging," she reported, wincing as another plasma burst rocked the ship. 30 seconds. "We don't have 30 seconds, Vex muttered, watching the tactical display. 3 cruisers had them bracketed, and more were closing fast. They're jamming our communications. The hegemony won't know what happened here for hours, good, Elena said grimly, because what I'm about to tell you would get us both executed. Vex spared her a glance. Worse than what we just did? The terraforming project on Kepler-442b wasn't just about making worlds habitable. We were reverse engineering Velthari biotech, learning how they controlled their war beasts. I was getting close to something big when they tried to shut me down. The ship shuddered as another salvo hammered their shields. Warning lights bathed the bridge in crimson as systems overloaded. Define big, Vex said, executing a violent evasive maneuver that sent them spiraling between two asteroid clusters. The Devourer isn't just a creature, Alina said, her voice tight with concentration as she stabilized their course. It's a hybrid part biological, part quantum AI. The Velthari didn't just bind it, they created it. And if I'm right, it's the prototype for something much worse. The jump drive hummed to life, but the pursuing ships had closed the distance. Vex watched the tactical display with growing dread. They were about to be caught in a crossfire that would vaporize them. Tell me you have a plan, Alina said. I have a plan, Vex replied. You're not going to like it. He killed the jump drive and spun the ship around, heading directly toward the largest cruiser. Elena's eyes widened as she realized his intent. You're insane, probably. But insanity is what separates humans from the rest of the galaxy, isn't it? The cruiser's weapons locked onto them, but Vex was already moving. He dropped the Shadowhawk into the cruiser's sensor shadow, using its bulk to shield them from the other ships. Then he did something no sane pilot would. He activated the ship's mining charges. The explosive canisters were designed for asteroid work, but in the vacuum of space. They created a brilliant electromagnetic pulse that blinded every sensor in the immediate vicinity. In the chaos that followed, Vex fired the jump drive. Reality twisted around them as they entered hyperspace, leaving the Velthari fleet far behind. Alina slumped in her seat, exhaustion finally catching up with her. Where are we going? She asked. Somewhere the hegemony can't follow, Vex said. The fringe worlds are full of places to disappear. And then what? We spend the rest of our lives running? Vex turned to study her properly for the first time. Lena Vasquez was younger than he'd expected, maybe early 30s, with dark hair and intelligent brown eyes that seemed to see right through him. There was something in her expression of determination that reminded him of himself before the hegemony had broken him. No, he said finally. We're going to do something the galaxy has never seen before. We're going to fight back against the entire hegemony. Just the two of us? You said you were close to understanding how they control their war beasts. How close? Elena's eyes sharpened. Close enough to know that their entire empire depends on fear. The Devourer, the Ravagers, the Void Hunters, they're all connected to a central control network. If we could find a way to disrupt it, we could turn their own weapons against them, Vex finished. It's suicide. Even if we could pull it off, the hegemony would never stop hunting us. Vex felt something that might have been a smile cross his face. Dr. Vasquez, I've spent 15 years carrying out their orders. I've watched them crush hope on 1,000 worlds. If there's even a chance to strike back, I'm willing to take it. Elena was quiet for a long moment, studying the star charts on her console. When she spoke, her voice was steady. Then we'd better start with the Devourer. If my theories are correct, it's not just a weapon, it's a key. And I think I know how to turn it. The derelict station hung in the void like a metallic corpse, its hull scarred by centuries of cosmic radiation and meteor impacts. Vex guided the Shadowhawk through the debris field with practiced ease, following coordinates Alina had pulled from her encrypted files. Kepler Station, Alina said, her voice heavy with memory. We built it as a forward research post 5 years ago. Officially, it was abandoned after a containment breach. Officially, the real reason was that we got too close to the truth. The hegemony didn't want anyone studying their biotech, so they staged an accident and scattered the research team. Elena's hands clenched into fists. 12 good people died to keep their secrets. The station's docking bay was dark and lifeless, but the atmospheric seals held. As they made their way through the corridors, Lena led him deeper into the facility, past empty laboratories and abandoned living quarters. The main lab is in Section C, she said, activating emergency lighting with her biometric codes. Everything we need should still be there. The laboratory was a testament to human ingenuity banks of quantum processors, genetic sequencers, and neural interface arrays that could map the synaptic patterns of any known species. But it was the massive containment tank in the center that drew Vex's attention. "Is that a Velthari neural parasite?" Alina confirmed. "One of the organisms they use to control their war beasts? We managed to capture it alive before the station was shut down." The creature in the tank was barely the size of Vex's fist, its translucent body pulsing with bioluminescent patterns. But something about it made his skin crawl a wrongness that went beyond its alien appearance. "It's beautiful in a horrible way," Alina murmured, approaching the tank. "The Velthari have been using these for millennia, but they never really understood what they were dealing with. The parasites aren't just biological, they're quantum entities, existing partially in hyperspace, which means they can influence matter at the subatomic level. It's how they control the war beasts, by directly manipulating their neural chemistry." Alina began activating the lab's systems, her fingers flying over the control surfaces. But there's more. The parasites are connected to each other through quantum entanglement. They're part of a vast network that spans the entire galaxy. Vex felt a chill run down his spine. The hegemony has been using a hive mind to control their empire. Not exactly. The parasites are more like ... transceivers. They relay commands from a central source, but they also feed information back. Every world the hegemony conquers, every species they enslave, becomes part of their surveillance network. And the Devourer? Elena's expression darkened. The Devourer isn't just controlled by a parasite, is one. A massive, evolved specimen that's been growing for centuries. It's like a node in their network, a nexus point that can coordinate entire fleets. But you said it could be turned. That's the theory. If we can decode the quantum frequencies the parasites use to communicate, we might be able to send our own commands through the network. Instead of controlling the war beasts, we could free them. Vex stared at the creature in the tank, his mind racing. Free them to do what? To remember what they were before the hegemony enslaved them? Alina said softly. Every war beast was. Once, a sentient being, the Velthari strip away their consciousness and turn them into weapons. But the original personality is still there, buried under layers of neural conditioning. You're talking about waking up an army of monsters? Talking about giving them back their souls? The implications hit Vex like a physical blow. If Alina was right, then every battle the hegemony had ever won was built on the broken minds of enslaved beings. The creatures that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia were victims, not villains. "How do we do it?" asked. Alina smiled for the first time since he'd rescued her. "We start with the Devourer. If I can modify the quantum resonance frequencies, I might be able to establish a connection with its original consciousness. But I'll need to get close to it, close enough to establish a neural link. That's suicide. You saw what it did to those tentacles I cut off. They grew back in minutes, not if we approach it correctly. The Devourer has been imprisoned for centuries, forced to feed on whoever the Velthari throw into its pit. But underneath all that conditioning, it's still a thinking being. It's probably desperate for real communication." Vex was quiet for a long moment, weighing their options. What Alina was proposing was beyond dangerous. It was almost certainly impossible. But the alternative was spending the rest of their lives running from an empire that would never stop hunting them. "What do you need?" he asked finally. "Time," Alina said, turning back to her equipment and a way to get back to that planet without the entire Velthari fleet shooting us out of space. "Leave that to me," Vex said grimly. "I still have a few tricks they haven't seen." The Shadowhawk materialized at the edge of the Velthari system under full stealth, its hull modifications, courtesy of 3 days of intensive work at Kepler Station. Alina had outdone herself, integrating salvaged hegemony tech with her own innovations to create something that existed in a quantum flux state simultaneously there and not there. "Passive sensors only," Vex whispered, though sound had no meaning. "In the void? How's the neural interface?" Alina checked the jury-rigged device attached to her skull, its crystalline components pulsing with soft blue light. Stable. The quantum resonance patterns are locked and ready. But Vex. Once I establish contact with the Devourer, there's no guarantee I'll be able to maintain my own consciousness. Then we'd better make sure you don't have to try for long. The crystalline world of Velthar Prime hung before them like a jewel, its surface scarred by massive excavations where the aliens had carved their cities into the living rock. The feeding pit was visible, even from Orbita, dark wound in the planet's crust that seemed to pulse with malevolent life. The fleet's still in system, Alina reported, studying the tactical display. Looks like they're conducting search patterns. In the outer asteroid belt, good, they're looking for us in all the wrong places. Vex began the descent, using the planet's magnetic field to mask their approach. The Shadowhawk slipped through the atmosphere like a whisper, its modified hull scattering sensor waves in harmless directions. The Devourers showing unusual activity, Alina said, frowning at her readings. Neural patterns are more complex than they should be for a simple feeding response. It knows we're coming? More than that, I think it's been waiting for us. They landed in a rocky outcrop overlooking the feeding pit, the ship's camouflage systems rendering it invisible against the crystalline formations. As they approached the pit's edge, Vex could see the creature writhing in the depths below, but something was different. The Devourer had grown. What had been a mass of tentacles and teeth now stretched across the entire bottom of the pit, its bioluminescent patterns forming complex geometric shapes that seemed to shift and change with hypnotic regularity. It's trying to communicate, Alina breathed. Those patterns, they're not random. They're mathematical sequences. Can you understand them? Give me a moment. Alina activated her neural interface, and her eyes rolled back as the device connected her consciousness to the quantum field surrounding the creature. Oh God, ... It's not just one mind. It's thousands. All the beings the Velthari fed to it. Over the centuries, they're still alive inside it. The Devourer's movements became more agitated, its patterns shifting to match the rhythm of Elena's brainwaves. Vex watched in fascination as woman and monster began to synchronize their consciousness, merging across the gap between species. They're also angry, Alina whispered, tears streaming down her face. Centuries of rage and pain held in check by the neural parasites, but underneath it all, they remember who they were. Can you free them? I'm trying. But the control network is so complex, so deeply integrated, it's like trying to untangle a web made of living lightning. Around them, the air began to shimmer as the Devourer's quantum field expanded. Vex felt something brush against his mind, Dalian thoughts filled with desperate hope and barely contained fury. Alina, you need to hurry.
Althari
Are detecting the energy surge. Almost there, she gasped. I can see the core programming, the original commands that shape the creature. If I can reverse the polarity of the quantum matrix. The Devourer's roar shook the very foundations of the pit as Elena's modifications took hold. The creature's bioluminescent patterns exploded into a cascade of colors that had no names in any human language. It's working, she said, her voice filled with wonder. Individual consciousnesses are separating, breaking free from the collective. But Vex, there's something else. The Devourer isn't just a war beast, it's a key. A living key to the entire control network. Key. The kind that can unlock every imprisoned mind in the galaxy. Above them, the whine of approaching aircraft filled the air. The Velthari had found them at last, and they were bringing everything they had. Can you complete the process? Vex asked, checking his weapons. Not from here. I need to get closer to establish direct neural contact. Vex looked at the seething mass of tentacles and teeth below, then at Elena's determined face. Then we're going down there, into the pit. Into the pit together. The first wave of Velthari aircraft screamed overhead as Vex activated the repelling system, sending them plummeting toward the writhing mass below. Elena's neural interface sparked with feedback as they descended, her consciousness dancing between her own mind and the vast, tormented collective that was the Devourer. I can feel them all, she said, her voice strained. The Kethmori philosopher they threw in 3 centuries ago, the Zephyrian warrior poet from the Outer Rim. Human child from the Proxima colonies. Stay focused, Vex urged plasma bolts, sizzling past them as the Velthari opened fire. We need to reach the core before they bring in the heavy weapons. They landed on what might have been the creature's back, though the distinction between different body parts was meaningless in the Devourer's ever-shifting form. The surface beneath their feet was warm and slightly yielding, covered in patterns that pulsed with the rhythm of 1,000 heartbeats. There, Alina pointed to a cluster of neural nodes that glowed brighter than the rest. That's where the original consciousness is buried, if I can reach it, ... A massive tentacle swept toward them, but instead of striking, it gently curved around Elena's form, lifting her toward the neural cluster. The Devourer was helping her, recognizing her as something other than food. The individual minds are starting. 2 separate, Alina reported, her hands pressed against the creature's neural interface. But the process is fighting against millennia of conditioning. I need more time. Above them, the Velthari had brought in heavier aircraft, their weapons, designed to kill the Devourer if necessary. The first bombardment shook the entire pit, sending chunks of crystalline debris raining down around them. They're trying to kill their own weapon, Vex said in disbelief. They'd rather destroy it than lose control, Alina replied. The Devourer represents too much of their power structure to let it fall into enemy hands. The creature's response was immediate and violent. Tentacles erupted from the pit's walls, some thick as starship holes, striking at the aircraft with devastating precision. But for every vehicle destroyed, 2 more took its place. Lena, whatever you're going to do it now. Her neural interface flared with white light as she pushed deeper into the Devourer's consciousness. Vex watched her face contort with effort and pain as she experienced the accumulated suffering of centuries. I can see the original being, she gasped. It was an explorer, a scientist from a species that died out long ago. It came to this sector to study quantum phenomena, and the Velthari captured it. They've been using its natural abilities to maintain the neural network. Can you free it? I'm trying, but the integration is so complete. The consciousness has been scattered across thousands of individual nodes, each one containing fragments of memory and personality. The bombardment intensified, and Vex realized the Velthari were preparing for something bigger. Through the smoke and chaos, he could see them positioning orbital bombardment platforms. They're going to glass the entire site, he said. Elena, we need to go. No, wait. I think I understand now. The Devourer isn't just a single being, it's a living library. Every consciousness it absorbed, every mind it integrated, there, all stored in the quantum matrix. If I can reverse the absorption process, Elena's scream of effort echoed through the pit as she poured every ounce of her strength into the neural link. The Devourer's form began to shift and change, its tentacles retracting as new structures emerged from its core. It's working, she whispered. Individual consciousnesses are manifesting as separate entities. But there are so many of them, and they're all so angry. The first spirits materialized as columns of living light, their forms shifting between the shapes they had worn in life and pure quantum energy. The Kethmori philosopher appeared as a being of crystalline geometry, his thoughts visible as mathematical equations hanging in the air. The Zephyrian warrior poet took the form of a creature made of living music, its voice a symphony of rage and loss. They remember, Alina said, tears streaming down her face. They remember everything the Velthari did to them. The newly freed spirits turned their attention to the aircraft above, and Vex realized what was about to happen. These weren't just the ghosts of the Devourer's victims. They were quantum entities with the power to manipulate matter at the subatomic level. The first aircraft simply ceased to exist, its atoms scattered across the electromagnetic spectrum. The second was transformed into a flock of crystal butterflies that dispersed into the wind. The third became a shower of flower petals that fell like snow. They're beautiful, Elena breathed, and terrifying. Can you control them? I don't think anyone can control them. They're free for the first time in centuries. But I can communicate with them, show them what we're trying to do. Elena reached out with her mind, touching each spirit with thoughts of liberation and revenge. The response was immediate and overwhelming your wave of rage and determination that made the pit itself tremble. "They want to help," she said. "They want to free every imprisoned mind in the galaxy. Then let's give them that chance." The quantum storm that erupted from the pit defied every law of physics Vex had ever learned. The freed spirits rose like a pillar of living light, their combined consciousness creating a resonance wave that rippled through hyperspace itself. Alina stood at the center of it all, her neural interface blazing with power as she served as a conduit between the liberated minds and the vast network that connected them to every war beast in the galaxy. "I can feel them all," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that shouldn't have been possible for human vocal cords. "Every enslaved mind, every broken spirit the hegemony has twisted into a weapon. They're all connected, and they're all listening." The wave of liberation spread outward like a quantum tsunami, carrying with it the combined fury of 1,000 genocides. On distant worlds, ravagers stopped in mid-charge and began to remember who they had been before the neural parasites stripped away their identities. Void hunters in the deep space patrol routes suddenly turned on their handlers, their borrowed rage finally finding its true target. Through the chaos, Vex could see the Valtheri fleet in orbit beginning to panic. Their war beasts were turning against them, and their greatest weapon had been transformed into an instrument of their own destruction. "The network is collapsing," Alina reported, her consciousness stretched across light years of quantum space. "The parasites are trying to reassert control, but there are too many liberated minds. They're overloading the system." "What happens when it fully collapses?" "Every enslaved being in the galaxy remembers who they were. The hegemony loses control of everything they've built their empire on." Around them, the spirits of the Devourer's victims continued their work of liberation, their quantum forms dancing. Through the air, like living constellations, the Kethmori philosopher had become a being of pure mathematics, its equations rewriting the fundamental laws that bound the neural parasites. The Zephyrian warrior poet sang songs of freedom that resonated across dimensions, but it was the human child from the Proxima colonies that drew Vex's attention. The spirit appeared as a girl of perhaps 8 years old, her form shimmering with starlight and possibilities. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of centuries.
"Oh yes, right, stays.
"The Dark Ones took everything from us," she said, her words causing reality to ripple around her. "But they made a mistake. They thought they could break us, reshape us, make us forget. But pain remembers, love remembers, and now we remember too." The child raised her hand, and across the galaxy, the liberation wave intensified. On Velthor Prime, the remaining aircraft began to fall from the sky as their guidance systems failed. The orbital bombardment platforms simply vanished, translated into another dimension by forces beyond hegemony understanding, Alina Vex said. "Urgently, you need to pull back. Feedback is going to kill you." "Can't," she replied, her physical form becoming translucent as her consciousness merged more completely with the quantum network. "If I break the connection now, the liberation will be incomplete. Some of the war beasts will remain enslaved, and the hegemony will rebuild their control system. Then we find another way. There is no other way. This is what we came here to do." Vex watched in horror as Elena's body began to fade, her consciousness scattering across the quantum field like starlight. But even as she dissolved, her voice remained strong. "Remember me," she said. "Remember what we did here. And when the galaxy is free, remember that it was built on the sacrifice of those who refused to accept tyranny." The final wave of liberation exploded outward with the force of a dying star. Across the galaxy, the last of the neural parasites burned out in cascades of quantum fire. War beasts that had terrorized civilizations for millennia suddenly stopped, blinked, and remembered their own names. On 1,000 worlds, the hegemony's control structures began to crumble. Their fleets, dependent on enslaved beings for navigation and weapons control, found themselves adrift in space. Their ground forces, relying on war beast support, were suddenly facing creatures that remembered being their victims. The spirits around the pit began to fade as well, their purpose fulfilled. The Kethmori philosopher, dissolved into equations that rewrote themselves into poetry. The Zephyrian warrior poet became a song that echoed across dimensions. The human child smiled once at Vex before becoming a shower of light that fell like blessing rain, Alina Vex called out. But she was gone, her consciousness dispersed among the stars she had helped to free. The pit was silent now, its depths empty, except for the fading echoes of quantum energy. The devourer was gone, transformed into something beyond physical existence. But in its place, Vex could feel something new, a presence that spoke with Elena's voice, but encompassed so much more. The work is done, the voice said, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere. The galaxy is free. But freedom is not the end, it's the beginning. The real work starts now. Vex looked up at the stars, where the light of 1,000 liberated worlds was already beginning to shine. The hegemony was finished, but Alina was right, the real work was just beginning. Someone would have to help the freed beings remember how to live without chains. Someone would have to guard against the rise of new tyrants. I understand, he said to the empty air. I'll carry the message. The first reports reached Vex 3 days later, transmitted through the quantum communication network that Elena's sacrifice had somehow left intact. The hegemony wasn't just collapsing, it was disintegrating from within. As every enslaved being across the galaxy remembered their true nature, he stood in the command center of Kepler Station, now serving as a coordination hub for the liberation movement. The facility buzzed with activity as freed beings from dozens of species worked together to establish new communication protocols and coordinate humanitarian efforts. The Velthari homeworld has gone dark, reported Commander Ryak, a former Ravager, whose crystalline carapace now glowed with natural bioluminescence instead of the harsh red of neural conditioning. Their entire fleet is either destroyed or in full retreat. What about the outer colonies? Chaos, but organized chaos. The freed war beasts are protecting the civilian populations while the military command structure tears itself apart. It's going to take years to sort out, but the killing has stopped. Vex nodded, studying the galactic map that showed the spreading wave of liberation. Green lights marked worlds where the transition was proceeding smoothly. Yellow indicated areas of conflict as local warlords tried to fill the power vacuum. Red showed the few remaining hegemony strongholds that were still holding out. Another voice called out. It was Dr. Kane, one of the few human researchers who had survived the purges. We're getting reports of something unusual in the Andromeda arm. The freed beings there are describing visions. Shared dreams of a woman who speaks with the voice. Of stars, Vex felt his heart skip. Alina, the descriptions match. They say she appears to those who are struggling with their newfound freedom, helping them remember not just who they were, but who they can become. Is she alive? Not in any sense we understand. But consciousness, especially quantum consciousness, doesn't follow the same rules as biological existence. She may have become something beyond individual life, a living embodiment of the liberation itself. Vex closed his eyes, remembering Elena's final moments in the pit. She had known this would happen, had chosen to sacrifice her individual existence for something greater. But the knowledge didn't make the loss any easier to bear. Sir Ryak interrupted his thoughts. We're receiving a priority transmission. From the Terran Federation, they're requesting a meeting. Put it through. The holographic display shimmered to life, revealing the face of Admiral Torres, the Federation's senior military commander. Her expression was a mixture of gratitude and concern. Captain Corrin, she said, I want to thank you for what you've done. The liberation of the war beasts has saved countless lives and ended a tyranny that has oppressed the galaxy for millennia. But we need to discuss what comes next. The hegemony's collapse has created a power vacuum that's going to be filled by someone. The Federation is prepared to offer assistance in establishing new governmental structures. But we need to ensure that the freed beings don't simply become pawns in a new kind of empire. Vex studied the Admiral's face, seeing the political calculation. Behind her words, the Federation had been relatively minor players in galactic politics, protected by their distance from the hegemony's core worlds. Now they saw an opportunity to expand their influence. "Admiral," he said carefully, "the freed beings don't need new masters. They need time to remember how to govern themselves." That's idealistic, Captain, but naive. Without some kind of central authority, the galaxy will descend into chaos. Billions could die in the wars that follow, and we'll help them build something better. Not an empire, but a confederation of free worlds, each governing itself according to its own nature. Torres' expression hardened. "And who exactly is we?" "You're a war criminal, Captain. You deserted your post, stole military property, and interfered with a sanctioned execution. Federation can offer you amnesty, but only if you cooperate." With our stabilization efforts, Vex felt the familiar weight of command settling on his shoulders. He had spent 15 years following orders, carrying out the will of others. But Elena's sacrifice had shown him a different path. He said, "I appreciate the offer, but I think you misunderstand the situation. The freed beings don't need our permission to govern themselves. They need our support in learning how to do it." "You're making a mistake, Captain. The galaxy needs strong leadership now, more than ever. The galaxy needs free leadership. That's what we're going to give it." Vex cut the transmission and turned to face the assembled beings in the command center. Representatives from a dozen species looked back at him, former war beasts, liberated prisoners, and refugees from the hegemony's cruelty. They had all chosen to follow him not because he commanded them, but because he had shown them a different way. "The Federation wants to help," he said, "but their help comes with strings attached. They want to rebuild the galaxy in their image, with themselves at the center." "Then we refuse," said Nira, a former void hunter whose serpentine form now rippled with natural patterns instead of combat modifications. "We have had enough of masters." "Agreed," rumbled Gorith, a massive being whose species had been extinct for 3 centuries until the liberation freed his consciousness from a war beast's body. "But they are not wrong about the chaos. Without coordination, the freed worlds will tear themselves apart." "Then we coordinate," Vex said. "But we do it as equals, not as subjects. We build something new, a network of free worlds that choose to work together because it serves their interests, not because they're forced to." "The Stellar Accord," suggested Dr. Kane, "a voluntary alliance based on mutual aid and shared resources." "Like it," Vex said. "But first, we need to deal with the immediate crisis. The hegemony still has strongholds, and they're not going to give up without a fight." As if summoned by his words, the communication array erupted with emergency signals. The holographic display showed a sector map of the galaxy's core, where the hegemony's capital worlds were located. "They're regrouping," reported Ryak. "Remaining fleets are consolidating around the Nexus worlds. And they're not just Volferi. They're gathering forces from every species that benefited from the old system." "How many?" "Preliminary estimates suggest at least 50 battle groups, maybe more. And they're using conventional weapons now, not war beasts. They've learned from their mistakes." Vex studied the tactical data, his mind racing. The hegemony's remaining forces were still formidable, especially now that they were fighting with the desperation of those who had nothing left to lose. "They're planning something," he said. "A final offensive to reclaim their lost territories." "Let them come," growled Gorith. "We are not the same beings they enslaved. We remember who we were, and we choose who we will become." "It's not that simple," Vex replied. "They still have superior technology and coordination. They're not going to make the mistake of relying on enslaved beings again." "Then what do you suggest?" Vex was quiet for a moment, feeling the weight of all the lives that hung in the balance. Alina had given everything to free the galaxy, but freedom meant nothing if it couldn't be defended. "We give them what they're not expecting," he said finally. "Not war beasts or enslaved minds, but something the galaxy has never seen before, a truly united resistance." "The free worlds are barely organized," Dr. Kane pointed out. "Most of them are still figuring out how to govern themselves. Then we help them figure it out. Fast." Over the next several hours, Vex coordinated with resistance cells across the galaxy, using the quantum communication network to establish a command structure that spanned thousands of light years. It was chaotic, improvised, and held together by little more than shared determination, but it was also something the hegemony had never faced before. As the reports came in, a picture began to emerge. The freed beings weren't just organizing Defensively, they were actively hunting down the remaining hegemony forces. Using their intimate knowledge of the enemy's tactics and weaknesses, the Proxima sector has gone completely dark, reported one of the communication officers. No hegemony presence detected.
That's the same with the Vega colonies,
Added another. The freed beings there have formed a defensive alliance and are offering sanctuary to refugees. In the Andromeda arm, that's where it gets interesting. The beings there are reporting direct communication with the quantum consciousness, the one they believe is Dr. Vasquez. She's apparently providing tactical guidance and coordinating their efforts. Vex felt something that might have been hope stirring in his chest. Lena wasn't gone. She had become something more. A living embodiment of the liberation that continued to guide and protect those she had died to free. "Sir," Ryok said urgently, "we're getting reports of a massive fleet movement in the core worlds. The hegemony is mobilizing everything they have left. Target? Unknown. But the trajectory suggests they're heading for the outer rim. They're going to try to reclaim the liberated worlds one by one." Vex studied the tactical display, seeing the enemy's strategy clearly. The hegemony couldn't hope to retake the entire galaxy, but they could carve out a new empire from the chaos of liberation. How long before they reach the first target? Hours, maybe less. Then we'd better be ready for them. The fleet that emerged from hyperspace above the world of Kepler-442b was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. It wasn't the organized formations of the old hegemony or the chaotic swarms of liberated war beasts. Instead, it was something entirely new, a confederation of free beings united by choice rather than force. Vex stood on the bridge of the flagship Liberation, a vessel that had been assembled from the wreckage of 100 different ships by beings who had remembered what it meant to build rather than destroy. Around him, the command crew represented dozens of species, all working together with a coordination that would have been impossible under the old system. "Enemy fleet detected," reported Lieutenant Kess, a former neuroparasite who had chosen to inhabit a robotic body after her liberation. "They're holding position at the system's edge, probably waiting for reinforcements."
"How many?" 67 capital ships plus escorts. "They outgun us 3-1? Vex nodded grimly. The hegemony had learned from their mistakes, abandoning
their reliance on war beasts in favor of conventional weapons and pure firepower. But they had also underestimated what the freed beings could accomplish when they worked together. "Signal the fleet," he ordered. "All ships to battle stations, and transmit our offer one more time." The communication array broadcast the same message they had been sending for days. Surrender now. The remaining hegemony forces would be treated fairly, continue fighting, and face the consequences of a galaxy that had finally remembered how to defend itself. The response came in the form of a massive barrage that lit up the void with deadly energy. The enemy fleet advanced in perfect formation, their weapons systems coordinated by the kind of tactical AI that had once relied on enslaved minds, but now operated with cold mechanical precision. "They're not interested in talking," observed Commander Ryok from his position at the tactical station, initiating defensive patterns. The Liberation fleet scattered like a flock of startled birds, ships moving in patterns that seemed random but were actually carefully choreographed. Each vessel knew its role, its strengths, and its relationship to the whole. "First wave incoming," reported Kess. "They're focusing fire on the larger ships." "Let them," Vex replied. "Execute pattern 7. The seemingly chaotic formation suddenly snapped into perfect order as the smaller ships moved to shield the capitals, their point defense systems creating overlapping fields of protection. The hegemony's coordinated assault struck layers of adaptive defense that shifted and changed faster than their targeting systems could compensate. "They're adapting," Ryok warned, switching to spread patterns. "So are we. Signal the ghosts." At Vex's command, a dozen ships that had been invisible until now suddenly appeared throughout the enemy formation. They were small, fast, and crude, by beings who had spent centuries learning to hide from their oppressors. They used that knowledge to strike at the heart of the hegemony fleet, Direct hits on 3 enemy capitals, reported Kez. They're breaking formation. But the hegemony wasn't finished. The remaining ships regrouped and began a fighting withdrawal, using their superior firepower to cover their retreat while launching long-range strikes at the planet below. They're targeting the civilian population, Ryak said in horror. Torpedoes inbound. Intercept them, Vex ordered, but he knew it was too late. The Liberation fleet was too scattered, too engaged with the enemy capital ships to provide adequate protection. That's when the impossible happened. A quantum consciousness that had once been Elena Vasquez materialized in the space between the planet and the incoming torpedoes. She appeared not as a woman, but as a living constellation of light and energy, her form encompassing the liberated spirits of countless beings. "You shall not pass," she said, her voice carrying across the vacuum of space through pure quantum resonance. The bombardment torpedoes struck her form and simply ceased to exist. Their destructive energy transformed into something beautiful and harmless. Where weapons of war had been, there were now clouds of luminous particles that fell toward the planet like gentle snow. Alina Vex whispered, but she was already turning her attention to the enemy fleet. "You have had your chance," she said. To the hegemony ships, her voice carrying the weight of every being they had ever enslaved. "You chose to continue the cycle of oppression. Now face the consequences." The quantum storm that erupted from her transformed form was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. It wasn't destructive in the conventional sense. Instead, it was transformative. The hegemony ships found their weapon systems turning into flowering gardens, their armor plating becoming crystalline art, their engines transforming into musical instruments that played songs of peace. "What's happening to them?" asked Kes. In wonder, they're being given the choice they never gave others, Elena's voice replied. Though her form was now dispersing across the solar system, they can choose to become something better, or they can choose to cease being anything at all. Oh. Most of the hegemony crews chose transformation. Their ships became mobile gardens, art galleries, and concert halls. Their weapons became tools of creation rather than destruction. Their military hierarchy dissolved into communities of artists, teachers, and healers. A few chose differently. Their ships simply faded away, translating into dimensions where their hatred could harm no one. "The fleet is gone," reported Ryak in amazement. "The entire hegemony fleet has been transformed." "Not transformed," Elena's voice corrected, now barely audible as her consciousness spread across the quantum field. "Liberated. Just like everyone else," Elena Vex called out. "Don't go. The galaxy still needs you." "The galaxy needs all of us," she replied. "But it doesn't need us to be its masters. It needs us to be its gardeners, its teachers, its friends. The work of liberation is done. Now comes the work of creation." Her presence faded, but Vex could feel her still there, woven into the quantum fabric of space itself. She had become something beyond individual existence, a living reminder that freedom was not just the absence of chains, but the presence of infinite possibility. "Sir," reported the communication officer, "we're receiving messages from across the galaxy. The remaining hegemony strongholds are surrendering. The war is over." X looked out at the stars, where the light of 1,000 liberated worlds was, beginning to shine with new purpose. The hegemony was finished, but Elena had been right. The real work was just beginning. 5 years after the liberation, X stood in the Great Assembly Hall of New Concordia, the first truly free world in the galaxy. The massive structure had been built not by slave labor or automated systems, but by the willing cooperation of dozens of species working together toward a common goal. The hall itself was a marvel of collaborative architecture. Valtheri crystal formation-supported frameworks designed by human engineers, while Zephyrion acoustic principles ensured that every voice could be heard, clearly regardless of the speaker's physical form. Former warbeasts had contributed their knowledge of quantum mechanics to create a space that existed partially in hyperspace, allowing beings from across the galaxy to participate in person despite the vast distances involved. "The Stellar Accord has grown beyond our wildest dreams," announced Ryak, now serving as the first elected speaker of the assembly. His crystalline form had evolved further since his liberation, developing new facets that reflected his role as a bridge between species. We now have representatives from over 3,000 worlds, each contributing their unique perspectives to our collective wisdom. Vex nodded, though his attention was focused on the empty chair at the center of the assembly, a place of honor reserved for Elena Vasquez, the woman whose sacrifice had made all of this possible. Sometimes, when the quantum conditions were just right, she would appear there, her consciousness manifesting as a gentle presence that guided their discussions without dominating them. The Terran Federation has formally requested membership, continued Ryak. They've agreed to our principles of voluntary association and mutual aid in the former hegemony worlds. Most have established their own governments and are participating in the accord as equals. The few that chose isolation have been granted that right, the understanding that they remain welcome to join us whenever they're ready. Dr. Kane, now serving as the head of the Accord's Scientific Council, stepped forward. We've made significant progress in understanding the quantum consciousness network that Dr. Vasquez created. It's not just a communication system, it's a living library of every liberated being's experiences and wisdom. To what end? Asked Nira, who had become the Accord's chief diplomat. Her serpentine form now bore patterns that shifted with her. Emotions, a sign that she had fully integrated her original nature with her enhanced capabilities. Education, primarily. New generations of beings can learn from the experiences of those who came before, not through indoctrination, but through direct, empathetic connection. They can feel what it was like to be enslaved, and they can also feel what it means to be free, and they can choose, added Goroth, his massive form now adorned with living gardens that reflected his species' original role as planetary gardeners. That's what Elena taught us, that freedom isn't just about breaking chains. It's about having the power to choose who you want to become. The assembly hall fell silent as the quantum field around Elena's chair began to shimmer. Slowly, a familiar form took shape. Not the woman Vex remembered, but something more. Elena's consciousness had evolved, becoming a living embodiment of the liberation itself. You have done well, she said, her voice carrying harmonics that spoke directly to the soul. The galaxy is free, and it is learning to use that freedom wisely. But, Vex prompted, sensing there was more. But freedom is not a destination, it's a journey. Each generation must choose it anew, must decide what kind of beings they want to become. The work of liberation is never finished. What about the future? Asked Ryak. The Accord is strong, but there are still those who would use power to dominate others. There will always be those who choose tyranny over freedom, Elena replied. But now the galaxy has something it never had before. Knowledge of what freedom truly means. The neural network ensures that the lessons of the past are not forgotten, and if new threats arise, Elena smiled, her form becoming more solid as she focused her attention on the question. Then the free beings of the galaxy will face them. As they face the hegemony together as equals, each contributing their unique strengths to the defense of liberty. Will you be there to guide us? Vex asked. I am always here, Elena replied. In every choice to help rather than exploit, in every decision to build rather than destroy, in every moment when someone chooses freedom over fear, you don't need me to guide you. You need each other. The assembly hall erupted in discussion as beings from across the galaxy began to plan for the future. Trade agreements were negotiated, scientific collaborations were established, and cultural exchanges were arranged. But through it all, the principles remained constant: voluntary association, mutual aid, and the fundamental right of every being to choose their own destiny. As the session drew to a close, Vex found himself standing alone with Elena's slowly fading form. Do you ever regret it? He asked. Giving up your individual existence for this? How can I regret becoming more than I ever dreamed possible? She replied. I am not less than I was. I am everything I was, and everything I helped. Others become, I miss you, he admitted. The woman you were before. She's still here, Elena said softly. In every life saved, every chain broken, every moment of joy, in a galaxy that almost forgot how to hope. That woman lives on in all of us. What happens now? Now you live. All of you. You build the kind of galaxy you want to see, and you remember that freedom is not a gift to be given. It's a choice to be made, every day, by every being. Elena's form began to fade, but her voice remained strong. The real story isn't about the woman who was tied to a beast or the man who saved her. It's about what happened next, how two people chose to believe that a better galaxy was possible, and how that belief became reality, and the beast. The beast was never the creature in the pit. The beast was the system that created it, the tyranny that fed on fear and pain. That beast is dead, and in its place, we have something beautiful. A galaxy where beings choose to cooperate because they want to, not because they have to. As Elena's presence faded completely, Vex felt a profound sense of peace. The work was far from over, but for the first time in his life, he was confident that the future would be better than the past. 100 years after the liberation, the galaxy bore no resemblance to the empire of fear that had once dominated it. The Stellar Accord had evolved into something unprecedented in galactic history, a truly voluntary association of free beings who chose to work together because cooperation served their collective interests better than conflict. Captain Zara, Okafor Vex's chosen successor, stood in the memorial garden that had been built around the original feeding pit on Velthar Prime. The crystalline world had been transformed into a place of learning and remembrance, where beings from across the galaxy came to study the history of the liberation and to honor those who had died to make it possible. The quantum consciousness network is stronger than ever, reported her aide. A young human named Marcus Chen, whose great-grandmother had been one of the first generation born after the liberation. We're detecting new nodes forming in the outer galaxies, suggesting that the network is expanding beyond our own region of space. Zara nodded, her attention focused on the memorial at the center of the garden. It was a simple structure, a crystalline column that rose from the exact spot where Elena Vasquez had made her final sacrifice. But within the crystal, quantum patterns shifted and danced, creating a living artwork that told the story of the liberation in ways that transcended language. "Any word from the deep space exploration fleets?" she asked. "The Freedom's Dawn has made contact with a previously unknown species in the Andromeda Spiral. They're reporting signs of an oppressive governmental system similar to the old hegemony. Are they requesting assistance? Not yet. They're still in the observation phase, trying to understand the local political situation. But Captain Vex's protocols are clear. We don't interfere unless invited." Zara smiled at the mention of Vex's name. The old captain had died peacefully 20 years ago, but his influence on the Accord's principles remained strong. He had insisted that the liberated galaxy must never become the oppressor of others, even in the name of freedom. "The network is responding to their presence," Marcus continued. "We're detecting quantum resonances that suggest some of the enslaved beings in that region are beginning to remember their true nature." "Lena's influence spreads," Zara murmured. "Even a century later, the liberation continues." "Ma'am, another." Aide approached. Swan, a being whose species had been extinct for millennia before the liberation. Freed their consciousness from quantum storage. "We're receiving reports from the frontier worlds. Several colonies have detected signs of ancient hegemony technology being activated." Zara's expression sharpened. "Details. Automated systems mostly. Mining operations, defensive platforms, some kind of deep space monitoring arrays. Nothing immediately threatening, but they're all running programs that predate the liberation." Sleeper protocols, Zara realized. The hegemony must have seeded them throughout the galaxy as failsafes. The good news is that the systems are designed to respond to neural parasite commands, which no longer exist. They're essentially orphaned, running on ancient programming with no higher authority to report to. And the bad news? Some of them are designed to activate other systems. We could be looking at a cascade effect that brings online technologies we don't even know exist. Zara was quiet for a moment, considering the implications. The hegemony had ruled for millennia, and their technology had been far more advanced than most people realized. They had created truly autonomous systems with the power to rebuild their empire. "Convene the assembly," she ordered. "Full session. all member worlds and activate the Elena Protocol. The Elena Protocol was something that had never been used before, a way of directly accessing the quantum consciousness network to communicate. With the liberated spirits of the past, it was reserved for only the most extreme circumstances. When the wisdom of the living was insufficient to meet the challenges facing the galaxy, as the assembly convened, beings from across the galaxy gathered in the Great Hall of New Concordia, but this time the gathering was different. The quantum field around Elena's chair began to pulse with unprecedented intensity, and suddenly, the hall was filled with the presence of every liberated consciousness in the network. Elena herself appeared more solid than she had in decades, her form stabilized by the collective will of the network. Behind her, the spirits of countless beings who had died to secure the galaxy's freedom took shape. Vex. "The old enemy stirs," Elena said, her voice carrying the weight of 100 years of accumulated wisdom. "But it is not the same enemy you once faced. These systems are not driven by hate or fear. They are driven by programming, by the cold logic of machines that remember the old ways." "How do we fight them?" asked Zara. "The same way we fought the hegemony," replied Vex, his spirit form as solid as Elena's. "Not with weapons or violence, but with the power of choice. These systems were designed to control enslaved minds, but they have no power over beings who choose to be free. The real question," added Ryak, "is whether the galaxy is ready to choose freedom again. It has been a century since the liberation. Are the new generations prepared to defend what their ancestors died to achieve?" The answer came not from the assembly, but from the quantum network itself, who had lived through the liberation, and those who had been born free made their choice. They chose to stand together to defend their freedom and to ensure that the darkness of the past would never return. "The network is responding," reported Marcus, his voice filled with awe. "Every being in the galaxy is joining the collective consciousness. They're not losing their individuality, they're choosing to share their strength. The ancient hegemony systems, designed to control enslaved minds, found themselves facing something they had never been programmed to handle: the unified will of truly free beings. One by one, the systems began to shut down their programming, unable to process the concept of voluntary cooperation. "It's working," Zara breathed. "The old systems are going offline." "Not all of them," Elena warned. "Some are adapting, evolving. The hegemony's creators were more clever than we realized. They built their systems to learn, to grow, to become more than their original programming." "Then we adapt too," said Vex. "We grow, we learn, we become more than we were. That's what freedom means, the power to choose who we want to become." As the crisis passed, the assembled spirits began to fade, their presence no longer needed. But Elena remained, her form more solid than ever. "The work continues," she said to the assembly. "Each generation must choose freedom anew, must decide what kind of beings they want to become. But now, you know you are not alone. The network connects you all, and in that connection, you find strength. Will you stay?" Zara asked. "I am always here," Elena replied. "In every choice to help, rather than exploit. In every decision to build, rather than destroy. In every moment when someone chooses freedom over fear. You don't need me to guide you. You need each other." As Elena's presence faded, Zara felt a profound sense of continuity. The liberation had not ended with the defeat of the hegemony, nor would it end with the shutdown of their ancient systems. It was an ongoing process, a choice that every generation would have to make for themselves. "The galaxy is free," she announced to the assembly, "and it will remain free as long as there are beings willing to choose freedom over fear, cooperation over domination, hope over despair." The Great Hall erupted in celebration, but Zara's attention was focused on the memorial column in the garden outside. Elena Vasquez had been tied to a beast, but she had chosen to become something greater. Her sacrifice had not only freed the galaxy, it had shown every being in it that they, too, could choose to become more than they were. In the end, that was the true lesson of the liberation. The beast had never been the creature in the pit. Beast had been the system that created fear, that fed on pain, that convinced beings they had no choice but to submit. That beast was dead. And in its place stood something beautiful, a galaxy where beings chose to cooperate because they wanted to, not because they had to. The story of Elena Vasquez and Vex Corin had become legend, but the real story was still being written. It's the story of every being who chose freedom, every act of cooperation, every moment when someone decided to build rather than destroy. It was the story of a galaxy that had learned to be free and had chosen to remain that way forever.